The story begins with the protagonist, Shen Xiang, practicing martial arts by punching the wooden log, feeling satisfied with himself and enjoying his own company. A sound of an applaud came from behind. It was Shen Jinhua, along with his two followers, who mockingly berated the protagonist Shen Xiang. The protagonist Shen Xiang, feeling irritated, asked what Shen Jinhua wanted. Shen Jinhua, without answering to the protagonist, scoffed and began telling the protagonist Shen Xiang not to embarrass the Shen family with his pseudo-practice in its martial arts training ground. Then proceeds to mock again by asking the protagonist, Shen Xiang, whether he wanted to punch the broken logs to make others laugh, at the same time breaking the logs himself with his qi, impressing his two followers. One commended that brother Shen Jinhua was too strong, and the other praised his qi as the true form of 4th level of mortal martial realm. Shen Jin further proceeds to mock the protagonist, Shen Xiang, by pointing out that even if the protagonist, Shen Xiang, does his best to practice every day or practices until his hands bleeds, it will be a waste, as the protagonist Shen Xiang didn't possess the spiritual veins. Shen Jinhua further mocked his father as trash, and implying the protagonist to be a trash like his father. The protagonist, reaching his breaking point, frustratingly dared Shen Jinhua to repeat his words. Shen Jinhua further, with mocking attitude, questioned the protagonist, Shen Xiang, whether he was wrong in saying so, and also indicating that the strength of the protagonist's father, Shen Tainhu, that he might possess the strength to compete for the position of patriarch, but because of the protagonist's weakness he does not qualify to participate. Further adding that the protagonist live to feed on his old father, despite his old age, making others feel pity for the protagonist's father. The protagonist Shen Xiang, having heard enough, dashed forward to confront Shen Jinhua. While inquiring if Shen Jinhua wanted to pick a fight with him, Shen Jinhua looked down on the protagonist with disdain. While the protagonist directing his punch towards Shen Jinhua, possessing superior martial prowess compared to the protagonist, moved fast. The protagonist only managed to leave only a scratch on his right cheek, infuriating Shen Jinhua. Shen Jinhua angrily exclaimed that he would kill the protagonist, and took a fighting stance. The protagonist, while thinking to himself that the opposition Shen Jinhua, being just at the 4th mortal martial realm, only relied on his true qi and is lazy to practice, and hoped for luck, and thought that the chances for winning may be possible, in case qi was not used and only relying on physical prowess for combat. Both of them launched at each other. The protagonist managed to avoid Shen Jinhua's punch, and instead managed to deliver his own punch on Shen Jinhua's stomach. One of the followers, shocked that the protagonist, who was considered a trash, seemed to manage to defeat Shen Jinhua. The other follower of Shen Jinhua pointed to the other to look closely. Returning to the combat, the protagonist suddenly felt the pain of the impact on his fist. Seemingly Shen Jinhua used qi energy to harden his body, including his stomach. At the last moment, the protagonist's fist impacted. Shen Jinhua then jumped in the air, and with a kick sent the protagonist to the ground with a loud crashing sound. The impact shattered the ground, and dust rose like smoke. Shen Jinhua, then thinking to himself and feeling displeased that he was almost defeated by the trash. The onlooker, follower of Shen Jinhua, with admiration asked whether Shen Jinhua had reached the 5th level of mortal martial realm. Shen Jinhua, feeling proud, acknowledged that he had just advanced, but it seemingly was working quite well. Shen Jinhua, while lifting up the protagonist's body, grabbing his hair, who was almost lifeless and bloodied, asked, with disdain, if the protagonist wanted to use his wits to sneak in and attack on him, and what should he do with the protagonist. While proceeding to use his qi to strike the protagonist's chest, sending him flying and crashing against the wall of the house. Shen Jinhua then followed up to attack by directing his qi attack energy towards the protagonist, with the intention to kill the protagonist. There was a loud boom sound with smokes blowing up on the impact of his attack. After the smoke from the attack cleared out, a figure stood before the protagonist, and he seemed to have taken the qi energy attack which was directed towards the protagonist. It was the protagonist's father, Shen Tianhu. Shen Jinhua, with amusement, clapped excitedly behind him. like a spoiled child, and said that the protagonist's father had good cultivation and was thus able to directly block his attack. The protagonist's father, Shen Xiang, sustained the injury. Having seen his son injured and unconscious, Shen Xiang's side glared at Shen Xianghua and asked Shen Xianghua to get lost. Shen Xianghua felt a chill and turned pale blue. Shen Xianghua hurriedly retreated with his 2 followers, but not before saying that it will not be long, before the time to compete for the position of the head of the family, and that he shall look forward to see his own father succeed. The protagonist's father Shen Xiang sadly held his bloodied and defeated son in his arms. The protagonist, Shen Xiang, weakly muttered with blood dripping from his nose and head that he was a burden to his father. The protagonist's father, Shen Xiang, while picking him up, said that the world of martial arts was not for everyone, keeping in his mind his son's weakness because of the absence of spiritual veins. The protagonist's father further advised him that normal people have their own way of life and that he did not need to be bothered by his struggle. The protagonist uttered with weak voice that the Shen family does not to accept mortals, referring to himself, in their fold. Shen Xiang was recovering from the injuries inside his locked room. A female voice was heard calling out to him, asking whether he was inside. Outside Xiang, a beautiful woman adored with flowers on both her hair buns, translucent eyes and skin fair as mirror. The protagonist, Shen Xiang, wondered if she was Xiang Xiang. Xiang Xiang was his fiancée. Xiang Xiang asked Mr. Shantain, the protagonist's father, who was also outside the protagonist's room, whether Shen Xiang was seriously injured, as he refused to see her despite her multiple attempts to approach him. The protagonist's father advised her to go home, as Shen Xiang might not want to see her too. Xiang Xiang, still persistent, asked what might be the reason, because she was his fiancée and so they could share all their grievances to one another regardless. The protagonist's father recommended Xiang Xiang to end the relationship with Shen Xiang. Xiang Xiang, taken aback, asked for the meaning. The protagonist's father, continuing without concerning to answer her, pointed out that Xiang Xiang herself was the treasure of Shui family, and also a martial art genius, was not compatible with his son, who do not possess spiritual veins and thus destined to live a mortal life, further adding that Shen Xiang did not deserve her. Xiang Xiang, taken aback, stated that they loved each other and there was no question of worthiness, but the protagonist's father asserted that the decisions for marriage was for the parents of both the concerned parties to decide, and then pleaded her to go back to her home. Shen Xiang, who was inside his closed room listening to their conversation, vowed to become stronger, defying everything, despite his lack of spiritual veins. He resolved to become stronger for his fiancée Xiang Xiang, his father Shen Xiang, and himself. The scene opens on a place known as the Dead Place. It was also called the Immortal Devil Cliff. It was a dark and eerie mountain, with dead trees below. No live vegetation was on sight. Scattered skulls and bones lay at the foot of the mountain. The dark weather, adding to the ominous feeling, thundered, giving ominous air. A shadow of person is seen barely hanging on a mountain slopes, body dangling. It was none other than the protagonist, Shen Xiang. He was climbing atop the mountain. The protagonist was searching for something. Suddenly, it caught his sight in the shadows. It was shaped like a big mushroom. Upon closer inspection, it was red in color. It looked like a small red tree or a big red kidney. It was a rare, once-in-a-thousand-year. The hell spirit grass can only be picked on the Een day of the Een month in the Een year. The protagonist, thinking to himself that he could not miss the opportunity, as he would have to wait for many years to have the same kind of chance, climbed on slowly towards the hell spirit grass, and with one swift and strong pull managed to retrieve the demon spirit grass, while inwardly thinking to himself that the time to reverse destiny has arrived. Suddenly, a thunder strike hit the mountain and shocked the cliff, frightening the protagonist. Some stones from above fell, making the protagonist lose his balance, the protagonist cursing the heavens inwardly, for all his efforts seems to be going to waste. As he fell, the protagonist questioned as to how he could lose just like this. He desperately tried to grab on to some rocks, but it broke with his bloodied fingers. He tried holding on to anything while trying to confide in himself to hang on a bit more, then he would no longer be seen as a waste. Then everything went blank. When the protagonist opened his eye, some rock debris were falling. Upon noticing figures, he widened his eyes in astonishment. Looking at the two beautiful girls, both equally stunning, the protagonist muttered to himself whether he was dead. One girl with blue eyes spoke up, calling him little brat, commending him that if he does not stand up, she would leave him to die. The protagonist then got up to meet the two beautiful girls, who were relieved and were sighing. The protagonist then spoke up with an introduction of his name and specified that he had come to this place to harvest some herbs, but with the shaking of the cliffs he fell, further, adding that it wasn't his intention to disturb or offend the two girls who he referred to as senior sisters. The girl with blue hair and blue dress spoke up with some displeased sounds. She had thought that they had finally had someone to save them, but to their disappointment, the protagonist did not have any spiritual vein. She then continued trying to be comforting by saying that it might be fine, as when the both sisters die, at least the protagonist might build their grave. The protagonist inquired her for her casual death statement. She answered up by saying that the death chi was surrounding the immortal devil cliff, and that it would require a strong individual with strong physique and chi to get them out of there, as the two of them were also injured, and being at the bottom of the cliff, where wild animals raging around, was indeed akin to a death sentence, only waiting for the arrival of death. Meanwhile, the other girl placed her hand on her own shoulder, seemed visibly injured. The protagonist, being the true example, stepped forward and upon noticing the injury on the shoulder, offered to help with herbs that he had brought from his family. But the girl sadly replied that her wound cannot be treated with a normal spirit herb, and that with no hope for survival, concluding that they would all be buried, told him to forget the idea. The protagonist reiterated as to how she could know if she didn't even try, surprising the girl, the protagonist then continuing that he cannot lose hope as he had important things to do, and also pointing out to her that she may also herself have some important issues to attend, then encouraged her to hope for life. The protagonist further asserted that even if he had to bet on everything, he would let her try the herbs to heal herself. At the protagonist's insistence, both all looked at each other with amazement, and one of the girl whispered to the other that this little brat may be a subject they can try upon. The injured girl then pulled away her back sleeves and revealed her milky pure white back skin. With some injury on shoulders, the protagonist flustered, closing his eyes with his hands on his flustered face, murmuring that it was inappropriate and it was not convenient for him to do it. The other girl spoke up saying that they were both injured, and thus he himself had to rub the medicine on her. The protagonist, with bashfulness, apologized and proceeded to stretch his hand forwards, while the injured girl looked on seductively and as if tempting towards the protagonist. The protagonist was looking bewitched, but in reality the girl whose rear back he was about to apply his personal herbal homemade medicine. The girl was using some kind of seduction technique. No man was able to withstand her mystic skills, and they thought that the true nature of the protagonist would expect it to be revealed, and the girl further encouraging the protagonist to follow his instincts. The protagonist leaned his hand forward and touched her back with bewitched eyes, but then suddenly he heard his own voice to stop. The protagonist then slapped himself back to his senses. Recovered from the mystic aura, the protagonist apologized and confessed that he felt like he was being controlled by something, and apologized again. The other girl acknowledged to the other that the brat, referring to the protagonist, was good. The other reaffirmed, saying that the protagonist has a good character. Then the girl with blue eyes called out to the protagonist and congratulated him for passing out the test. The protagonist felt puzzled. She continued with her introduction while showing off her golden aura. Her name was Su Mei Yao, and she was the lord of the Danxiang Herbal Manor, and the other was her senior sister Bai Yuyu, who was flowing with bright purple aura, the princess of the Devil Domain. The protagonist stammered with astonishment and repeated their words. Su Meiyao. Continued, she revealed that they were attacked by their personal enemy and were severely wounded and unable to move, and also acknowledging that they have lost their previous strengths. Su Meiyao further added that formidable demon beasts lurk around the area where they are all currently occupying, and so they all had to escape quickly. The protagonist immediately asked to share the plan to escape. Bai Yuyu then replied that by gifting him the extreme yin and yang divine veins of her and her sister, the protagonist can refine and break through the death chi of the immortal devil cliff and escape. Su Meiyao included by saying that with herself and her sister character, even if they die, they would not give their veins to a person of low character, and thus was the reason behind Sister Bai Yuyu's seduction test. The protagonist then, for reconfirmation, asked had he passed the test. Sister Bai Yuyu told the protagonist not to rush thinking he passed the test, as the fusion and refinement of divine veins was not something ordinary and normal people could do, warning that there may even be chances of dying. Sister Bai Yuyu then advised the protagonist to either think carefully or refuse. The protagonist, seeing the opportunity, had no way to refuse and accepted, with a thought that this was his golden chance. Sister Su Meiyao then, with affirmation, officially asked the protagonist, Shen Xiang, if he was willing to sign the blood pact with two of them and receive the divine veins and help them recover their cultivation in future. The protagonist confirmed and with determination also added that as long as he became stronger, he would do anything. And so, they began the process to transfuse the divine veins on the protagonist by both the sisters by letting their chi energy flow through the protagonist. The protagonist felt the huge surge of power, his veins popping and bulging, almost exploding, and his eyes reddened and steam of smoke flowed out from his mouth, and then the veins started to bleed. Sister Su Meiyao then noticeably asked if the fusion of divine veins was difficult for the protagonist, as the protagonist's meridians were already broken and his divine consciousness was also constantly shrinking. Suddenly, there was a loud growling sound, shaking the cave and the place. Sister Su Meiyao with fright asked whether the protagonist had touched the hellgrass spirit, as it was the sound of ferocious beast. The beasts guarding the hell spirit grass had seemed to sense something, and all the guardian beasts were above the 7th level, and at that rate they would all die. Su Meiyao then asked Shen Xiang whether he wanted to continue, as his conditions were difficult at the moment, or give up, saving half his life. But the protagonist reiterated that he would not give up, answering with difficulty, and blood drooling from his eyes. The protagonist reflecting that he was unlucky to have been born without spiritual veins, and even though he had worked hard to enhance his physique, he was not able to catch up to others, and that he couldn't even help his beloved family either, and that now the golden opportunity was presenting itself to him. The protagonist roared with all his might and excitement that even if he was to die, he would not give up. Then, with a loud thud and blood exploding from his veins, he fainted. Both girls were shocked, and Sister Su Meiyao, while addressing to the protagonist, calling him as little brat. At the same time, a loud sound of wall collision was heard, with stone and dust pieces debris flying around. Both the girls glared behind, as if some sinister aura was felt. Through the broken hole, a huge demon beast roared, fang long as knives, and head and body shaped like a dinosaur, hair on the back of the head and on the neck. Both women were dazed and shocked, not knowing what to do as the protagonist had fainted. Sister Bai Yuyu pointed out to her sister to look at the protagonist's wounds and meridians, healing in their own. Su Meiyao affirmed with amazement and said that if the protagonist was lucky and smoothly manages to refine his 2 divine veins, there was no opponent he could not overcome. Yu, sensing the situation's distress, shared with her sister that they would distract the demon beast and give time for the protagonist to heal, as slim hope lay on his recovery. Both the women with confidence faced the demon beast, and both turned to the beast to attack simultaneously, but the demon beast proved too strong. for both of them and lashed at them, throwing them against the walls. Both lay defeated with blood sprouting from their mouth. Sister Bai Yuyu thought that if they had their original powers, they would have defeated the beast with just one strike. The beast, roaring and without giving any attention to the girls, ran towards the protagonist, with open mouth, to devour him. Sister Bai Yuyu, noticing the beast's focusing its attack on the protagonist, launched an attack with Grasping Soul Devil Curse, a whip made out of chi, and wrapped it around the beast's tail and pulled. The beast, losing its balance, fell, with his chin hitting the ground. Bai Yuyu, being observant, thought of buying some time for Shen Xiang. The beast, without giving any chance, pulled its tail up, dragging Bai Yuyu in the air, and with a heave/slash knocked Bai Yuyu to the ground. The beast then, having dealt with Bai Yuyu, focused its gaze towards Shen Xiang, who was still in the state on unconscious, and with its huge mouth opened, lunged towards Shen Xiang, while the two girls stood helpless with injury. A golden light struck the beast, sending it flying. The impact was so huge both the girls fell on the floor. Su Meo then sighed that his fusion was faster than they expected. Both were relieved. A figure stood before them with thick golden aura surrounding him. No traceable marks of injury was visible, and with a new sense of aura and power, the protagonist opened his eyes. Knowing that the path ahead will be very different, the protagonist was reborn. Golden aura shone around the protagonist. The yin and yang symbol glowed brightly behind the protagonist. The protagonist, emitting yellow aura throughout his body, was feeling amazed with the divine veins, the power overflowing throughout his body. The protagonist then glanced at the two sisters who were injured yet relieved that the protagonist could recover. The protagonist, with folded hand, bowed to both the sisters for having gifted him with the divine veins and also for distracting the beast while the protagonist was unconscious and recovering. Su Meo, menacingly glancing at the protagonist, pointed towards the beast and encouraged the protagonist to try to test his strength by fighting the hell beast, who was recovering the fall and was confused. The beast, after recovering, lunged towards the three, with a loud roar and mouth wide open and hands lifted to attack the three. At the same time, the protagonist also rushed towards the two girls who were in the middle of the battle. Then, with swift movement, grabbed both the girls in the waist and jumped on the higher ground. The beast, having no control over its movement, crashed onto the wall. The protagonist, after successfully seeing that they were on top, assured both the girls and then proceeded to deal with the beast. The protagonist then jumped towards the beast to confront it. The protagonist, having gained the divine veins, felt his own strength and power improve significantly, then jumped towards the beast to attack, with his fist clenched, shouting at the beast to try the power of his fist. The beast butted the protagonist's attack with his head and made the protagonist fall. The protagonist noticed that his attack punch had no effect. At the same time, the beast began inhaling deeply and then violently shaking his head, launched strange balls with lightning towards the protagonist. The protagonist ran to avoid the attack while complaining that the beast was hard to deal with. Su Meo, observing the scene from above, reprimanded the protagonist that even the beast was attacking with its chi, while the protagonist was using brute force. The protagonist, after coming to his senses, recollected that now he can use the chi, aside from relying only on brute force. The protagonist, then repositioning himself to attack, felt the aura rapidly flowing throughout his body, feeling as if his body could not contain itself and surging to burst. With the power of chi gathered in his hand, he launched an attack towards the beast. The beast at the same time gathered the power in its mouth and spewed towards the protagonist. But the protagonist, after having connected with the power, felt much faster and avoided the attack by quickly jumping to the ground, and the protagonist, with his chi gathered in his fist, finally managed to damage the beast and defeat it. The protagonist, with aura gathered around his body and hand, looked at his own hands, feeling an accomplishment, probably having the taste of his first glory. The walls shook, the stones fell from the top, falling towards the direction of the two girls. Su Meo, panicking, shouted at the protagonist for having been careless, mentioning that the place was about to collapse. The protagonist, sensing danger, jumped and flew towards the two girls, proclaiming that he would get both the sisters out. Sumeo threw a ring towards him, asking him to put a drop of his blood in the ring, in order for the ring to recognize him as his master, Sumeo adding that the ring was a storage ring. The protagonist, heeding the word, bit his thumb. Below, the beast, who was also recovered, ran with fear towards a hole. Meanwhile, at the top, both the girls and the protagonist looked at the falling stones. Sumeo advised that they needed to leave before it became late. Sister Bai Yuyu also nodded in agreement, after which both the sisters transferred into yellow and dark light and absorbed themselves inside the storage ring the protagonist wore. The protagonist, strengthening his body with the energy of Qi, proceeded to jump and escape while thinking of his father and Xian. After escaping the hell area, the protagonist was seen filling a bathtub inside a room with the bucket. After readying the water, the protagonist called the girls, informing the water was ready, at the same time pondering, if the girls wanted a bath, they could have chosen his family's place, which could have been more convenient. Sumeo reiterated that their identities will have to be hidden from others to avoid dangers. Sumeo then calmly and gladly removing her cloths moved towards the tub, saying that she can finally have a bath. The protagonist, flustered, asked whether he should guard the door to cover his embarrassment, but Sumeo asked him to stay, while Bai Yuyu, wrapped in towel and feeling annoyed, asked the protagonist to turn around and close his eyes. Both the girls got inside the bath side with relief and pleasure. Sumeo, while inside the bath, voiced out that she had something for the protagonist. The protagonist, while covering his eyes and with reddened face, asked what it was. Sumeo then asked him to come closer to her. The protagonist, with reddened cheek and eyes closed, walked towards them and leaned down towards her. Sumeo asked him to lower his head a little more so that her fingers could touch his head. Sumeo, with her finger touching the forehead of the protagonist, passed on her spiritual cultivation knowledge to the protagonist, while stating that she herself practiced this method of cultivation and asked the protagonist to practice it accordingly. The protagonist sat beside them to cultivate. Sumeo then recommended the protagonist make his true chi flow in his body and feel it. The protagonist obliged and then told that he could feel fire wildly surging inside his body. Sumeo acknowledged that it was true chi and said that, though the protagonist started it quickly, he needed to keep practicing it to control the power. Bai Yuyu added up that Sumeo used to be an alchemist and the protagonist should try those methods, but alchemy required great talent, and stressed that he should not force himself to learn it. The protagonist, in amazement and appreciation, told that the method given by them were amazing and transmitting many information, and asked whether they were of 8 martial realm or above. Sumeo with amusement replied that above the mortal martial realm, there are true martial realm, the nirvana realm, and so on, adding that the path of cultivation was much longer than he thought, that the continent where the protagonist lived was just a mere drop in the ocean of the entire martial arts world. Bai Yuyu spoke up, saying that their enemies could destroy the strongest man he ever knew with a snap of their fingers, reminding that it was dangerous to reveal their existence to anyone, even including his loved ones. The protagonist, dazzled, said he thought the 9th rank mortal martial realm was a peerless master, but after hearing the two sisters, he concluded they were just too weak. Sumeo, however, comforted the protagonist, saying that the protagonist need not worry as he had yin and yang divine veins, and advised him to practice the 4 symbols of divine arts and alchemy, and he would become a god of martial arts world. Both girls wrapped in towels after a bath, showing their alluring figure and skin. Sumeo, touching her own hair at the back playfully, longed for few more hours in the bath. Bai Yuyu, while clinging on to the towel with her right hand, and her left hand playing with her hair, in a grumpy but charming way told the protagonist that his foundation at present was weak, but she would teach him the devil cultivation method when an appropriate time comes. The protagonist nodded in positive anticipation that he would not disappoint either of them and would polish himself well. A shout echoed outside the room. It was the protagonist's father, calling out to his son and rushing in with tears in his eyes asking whether he was all right. Both the girls quickly got themselves absorbed by the ring in panic, worriedly asked the protagonist if he was affected by the dead chi gathered at the Immortal Devil Cliff, while also adding that he came to the protagonist as soon as he heard that the protagonist had arrived back from the Immortal Devil Cliff. The protagonist in panic conveyed that he was fine. Su Meo spoke telepathically, assuring that both of them were back inside the storage ring and the protagonist's father will not be able to detect them. The protagonist's father, in a strong, commanding but caringly, examined whether the protagonist had sustained any injury by holding his hand. Then, with widened eyes and surprised, was able to detect that his son had a spiritual vein. The protagonist, in acknowledgement, stated Hell Spirit Grass was worthy of its reputation as a 1,000-years-old spiritual herb, mentioning that the risk was worth it. His father, with tears of joy, nodded in agreement. The protagonist encouraged his father to compete for the position of patriarch in the family, believing in his success. The protagonist's father, then in positive agreement, attributing it to as God's will. With positive vibe, the duo, father and son, laughed, stating that they would let the Shen family see as to how the duo becomes the new leaders of the Shen family. A week after, at the Spirit Dan Pavilion, the protagonist seems to be engrossed in his thoughts, reflecting at how he had practiced and was also able to control the fire of the true chi proficiently, and also thought that just as Sister Su Meo suggested that if he wanted to improve his power quickly he had to rely on refining elixirs too. A pill caught his eyes. It was Peiyuan Body Dan, costing 5,000 large spirit stones. The protagonist almost wept at his inability to afford even the herbs to make some pills. Su Meo, inside the storage ring, telepathically spoke up, reprimanding the protagonist that if he wasn't able to afford the herbs, he could grow them himself. The protagonist, feeling uneasy, then repeated her word, asking whether she was joking with him, as it takes years to grow herbs. Su Meo said that the said duration was for common people, saying she had her own methods. The protagonist, after agreeing, then approached the salesperson asking whether the store had seedling of azure spirit grass and blood element flower, demanding 5 of each. The person behind the counter asked the protagonist to wait as he fetches the mentioned seeds. Behind the protagonist 2 figures approached. It was Shen Xiang Sores, a member of the Shen family who had also earlier bullied the protagonist, and Hua Yunxin, daughter of the governor of Wohu City. Shen Xiang Sores, scornfully addressing the protagonist as the waste of Shen family, asked whether he was buying herbs for his health. Hua Yunxin added, while clarifying, if it wasn't Shen Xiang, the protagonist, and commenting that it was an embarrassment for Shen family to have an eldest grandson as him. The protagonist, without giving any attention to their mockery, simply glanced at them and ignored. Hua Yunxin, unable to ignore the non-responding attitude of the protagonist, stirred up the situation by turning towards Shen Xiang Sores, asking as to how could a trash ignore Shen Xiang Sores like this. Shen Xiang, trying to avoid trouble, asked the salesperson to kindly hurry. Shen Xiang Sores, with annoyance in his face, asked whether the protagonist was itching for a fight again, then proceeded to strike the protagonist with Tianyang palm, while the protagonist stood with his back towards Shen Xiang Sores. As the attack landed, the protagonist, with lightning speed, avoided the attack. The attack destroyed the reception table. Shen Xiang Sores, in surprise, asked how the protagonist was able to dodge it. The protagonist then responded that Shen Xiang Sores only trained his true chi and lacked in physical training, and asked that with his speed, how Shen Xiang Sores expected to beat anyone. Shen Xiang Sores, with chi in his fist, exclaimed that the protagonist's turn hasn't arrived to be proud yet. The fist with chi looking like a fist of fire approached the protagonist. The protagonist simply caught with his hand with no effort. Shen Xiang Sores, admonishing the protagonist, action questioned as to how the protagonist had dared to challenge him, and also conformingly asked whether all of the bones on the protagonist's hand had broken. The protagonist, with annoyance, answered that he had thought that Shen Xiang Sores was just physically weak, but it turned out that Shen Xiang Sores' true chi was also useless, surprising Shen Xiang Sores. The protagonist, with his palm open towards Shen Xiang, asked him to witness true qi. Blazing bright as the sun, Shen Xiang, scared, questioned as to how a trash like the protagonist could muster such qi. Hua Yunxin, unable to bear the hot flaming aura, asked Zhenhua to teach the protagonist a lesson, instead of staring blankly. A voice loudly spoke from the room above, proclaiming that this was the Spirit Dan Hall, and questioned who had dared to fight inside. The protagonist was quick to apologize while stating his name, saying that he did not mean to offend him, adding that his younger brother in the family branch was incompetent and messing around, so he was taking the initiative to discipline him. The man then stated the situation as being their family business and asking why had they dared to disturb the master of Spirit Dan in the hall. While he was making the pills, the protagonist, turning towards Shen Xiang, said that he would let him go, and if Shen Xiang was not convinced, he could see him at the patriarch selection. Shen Xiang protested that the protagonist was not worthy, but the protagonist, with calm mind, ignored Zhenhua's statement and added that, as he had now gained spiritual vein, he would naturally help his father in the selection, concluding Zhenhua not to lose badly. Shen Xiang, with anger, gritted his teeth and wondered what kind of Dan the protagonist took that made him this lucky, and with wicked and mischievous smile thought of dealing with the protagonist, as he had Tianyang slashing axe which was passed on by the elders, mastering it before the selection of patriarch, thinking that it would be easy. Zhenhua, with Hua Yunxin, left. Hua Yunxin felt unsatisfied at letting the protagonist go unpunished. Shen Xiang also bade farewell, walking towards the door of Spirit Dan Hall, as the people whispered and praised him at mastering true qi at a young age, and also in general at the Shen family ability to produce good alchemy seedling. The person from above questioned whether alchemy can be performed by mastering the fire of true qi, and pondered at the countable size of alchemists in the entire South Martial Kingdom. Someone from behind answered that it was still a long way off without a master's guidance. The individual will not be able to make a single pill in his entire life, as making a Dan require the qualifications and resources beyond imaginations. Judging the protagonist as being a rare kind to be able to cultivate the fire of true qi at such a young age to pure level. The person asked the individual behind him, who was the master of the Spirit Dan Pavilion, if he saw the protagonist's talent, and whether he should recruit him. The master not only promptly rejected the idea to recruit the protagonist, but also told his assistant to spread the message to all the alchemists in Wohu City not to teach any alchemy lesson to the protagonist, Shen Xiang. At the Shen family's courtyard, few days after the incident at Pavilion of Spirit Dan, the protagonist is seen watering the herbs. It was from the seedlings he brought. Using the dragon slaver technique taught by Su Meo, grew the fruits and ripened within 3 days. Su Meo, accepting the protagonist appreciation, described the dragon slaver as the essence between heaven and earth, and which contained incomparable majestic vitality, while condensing the slaver and directing it towards the herb plants, Su Meo saying that the protagonist dragon slaver, being too weak, only affect the miscellaneous herbs, but in the future when his cultivation becomes pure and solid, even the millennium spiritual trees could be greatly accelerated. The protagonist in amazement watched the herbs and agreed that Su Meo's dragon slaver was more effective and he needed to practice more. Su Meo, teasing the protagonist, by lifting his chin with her finger, asked if he wanted her to help him improve breathing technique, gleefully adding if the protagonist pleaded, she could also teach him mouth to mouth. The protagonist nervously questioned if it wasn't a little inappropriate. Tensing up the scene, creating an awkward situation, Su Meo quickly responded that she was only teasing, asking why he was taking it seriously, calling him little brat. Inside the room, both the sisters were enjoying their meal, and the protagonist alongside them, humming that he could now finally try alchemy. The protagonist, with feigning ignorance, asked whether large food was needed to make alchemy. Su Meo, quick to respond, affirmed, as they had no idea how long it would take, arguing if the protagonist wanted to starve them to death. Bai Yuyu, in excitement, also seemed to enjoy mentioning She didn't even remember how long it had been ever since she ate food from the mortal world. The protagonist, while holding a small cauldron in his hand, wondered how long it would take to make these pills, then suddenly felt and thought to try, using his divine sense. The protagonist then found himself inside a strange space, with golden circles and light, confused as to where he was. A strange beast-like bird with tail of fox, head of an eagle flew towards the protagonist. Shocked, the protagonist wondered what the creature was. Su Meo appeared from a door-like shape out of nowhere, peeped, and while holding foods in her hand congratulated the protagonist at his talent, mentioning that it was a divine realm, surprising him. She also mentioned that this was her master unique Tao of alchemy, to create a special realm using divine sense. Su Meo added, while the protagonist was here, his true chi of fire will greatly be improved and his alchemy refinement will be 10 times more effective in comparison to outside. And at the sight of beast remarked that the beast was transformed by the fire of his own true chi known as Defying, and learning the refinement technique meant passing its first trial, enabling the protagonist to make mortal-level pills, and the trial vary according to individuals, and it was up to the protagonist to figure out himself. Su Meo, asking the protagonist to think about it himself, fled. The protagonist then jumped at the direction of Flame Bird, building confidence of whatever the test may be about. The Flame Bird gathered its chi energy in the form of fireball inside its mouth and hurled it towards the protagonist. The protagonist, startled, asked if the fight had started, and without a moment to spare was hit by the fireball. The protagonist began the counterattack, spewing his chi in his hand in the form of fireball, assuring himself that he couldn't go wrong using his chi power, launching it towards the fire bird. The bird also threw the fireball towards the protagonist. The balls of fire clashed, and after the explosion, as the fire vanished on sight, the bird seemed defeated, the protagonist claiming that he was right, as the trial was to condense his true chi fire at the right time and offset the bird's attack. The fire bird folded its wings, with immense aura around it, and then within seconds it spread its wings and split into 3 chickens, like birds. The protagonist, wondering why it had split into 3, at the same time facing a barrage of attacks from all 3 birds, assuring his own self that it was just a number, prepared for the attacks. Then a large ball of fire lunged toward the protagonist, which scared him, making him flee and turn his back around, but was hit. The protagonist, angered, then thinking of a way to deal with the birds, thought that the difference in size of the bird might represent difference in firepower, which would require him to use different level of purity of true chi, just like the alchemy, where the heat needs to be constantly adjusted, concluding that he would first deal with the smallest one. The protagonist then called out to the birds to attack while aiming his attack at the smallest bird. The plan of attack didn't go according to the plan. The bird was fast, and within a blink of an eye, it flew away, confusing the protagonist. The bird was already behind the protagonist, and with an attack, sent the protagonist crashing forward. The protagonist then stared above, wherein the 3 birds were hovering in circles, creating a circle formation of flame tornado, engulfing the protagonist. The protagonist, in pain, recollected that the frequency of speed and attack have become several times faster. It was necessary to distinguish the size of firepower while at the same time avoiding it and also quickly counterattacking. The protagonist then, with swift movement, ran towards one of the birds, holding his chi in his hand, and threw towards the bird, making a large sound, and even throwing back the protagonist with the force of the impact, the protagonist, recomposing himself, as he had underestimated them, called out again for attack, as the blazing fire surrounded him. The day of patriarch selection of the Shen family finally arrived. At the Shen villa in the courtyard stood 2 figures facing each other, and there was also a gathering of huge crowd to witness the fight for succession. Shen Hao Hai, an 8th level of mortal martial realm and the commander of Shen family branch, who was also the father of Shen Jinhua, stood and reprimanding Shen Tainhu, the protagonist father, unaware that the protagonist had gained spiritual veins, laid down the rules for backups to have good cultivation to compete for patriarch position, viewing him as not being worthy of the competition. The protagonist's father, with calm demeanor, stated that the entire city of Wohu knows that his son had potential to make variety of pills, defending his son, asking whether the elders of Shen family agree. Shen Hanhai, a 7th level of mortal martial realm and Shen Hao's brother in carefree attitude, pointed out that the protagonist had gotten into trouble with the spirit pill pavilion master, and so no alchemist would teach him, and everyone knew that in alchemy without a master it was impossible to make a single pill. Suddenly the protagonist, flying from above into the stage, saying who had said that he couldn't be an alchemist, swiftly landing on the stage with standing in front of his father, proclaimed that though he may not be talented, he could make pills without a master. Shen Hanhai, in a mocking manner, asked the protagonist if he had his brain fried, as it takes at least a year to learn alchemy, and he had just learned to master his true qi only a few days ago. Shen Haohai held his son, Shen Jinhua, by his collar, and worriedly shaking his son's vegetative body, asked if he was all right. Shen Jinhua's father, Mama Bear's love action looked more like an interrogation than fatherly love. Shen Jinhua muttered weakly for his father to stop shaking him before his bones fell apart. Shen Haohai, not happy with his son's state of situation, asked Shen Xiang what was the meaning of him beating his son to this state. Grabbing his son's back collar like a handbag and pointing towards Shen Xiang, voiced how Shen family could have a vicious person as him, regardless of clan's brotherhood. He had seriously injured his son. Shen Xiang in defense replied, Shen Jinhua, every move was a killing move, asking whether Shen Jinhua had concern for his life. It was not a life-concerning Tianjiang slashing axe attacks. Shen Xiang, out of the clan's friendship, did not consider to return the same intentions. Shen Jinhua's mother, shedding tears and crying, kneeled and begged one of the elders, who was like a dwarf, asking him to intervene, also trying to gather the crowd's sympathy, exclaiming that Shen Xiang should be punished for injuring her son. Some sections from the crowd voiced in agreement. Shen Tianhu, the protagonist's father, also did not remain quiet and answered, backlashed that it was Shen Jinhua who was inferiority to others, despite Shen Jinhua's secretly cultivating a spiritual technique, which was against the family's rule, was defeated, making her matter. The tension intensified and escalating to crowds from both sides fighting. The elder, in disbelief, touched his own head in tension. Someone from back commented that the current Shen family was a mess. A stranger, with long hat, in an aggressive way said, how a family with such mess and meager qualification covet Shui family, categorizing them as unworthy. Shen Hanhai, while grabbing someone from the crowd in a fight and unable to stand the criticism, angrily asked for the stranger's identity and admonished his rudeness and disregard for the Shen family. Shen Xiang stood at the stage, and his father, Shen Tianhu, standing before his son with indifference, looked and examined the stranger, noticing his family emblem by his waist, questioned if the stranger was from Wohu Yao family. The stranger, without answering, spoke up, saying that, on behalf of the Yao family, he had a message for Shen Xiang. With loud and arrogant tone, advised Shen Xiang to break off the engagement with Miss Shui Xianxian from the Shui family as early as possible. Shen Xiang responded in annoyance whether it was really the turn of the Yao family to judge his marriage with Xianxian, referring to the proposer as the Yao family's dog. The Yao family messenger, in contempt, threw a sword before Shen Xiang, making the sword lodge deep inside the ground. The messenger then added that was a reminder, and asked the protagonist not to blame him for being rude if he speaks out of turn again, continuing that the request to break off the engagement was not only from Yao's family, but also from Shui family, adding that the Shui family believes that only the young master from the Yao's family, Yao Tianhua, can be matched with Shui Xianxian, and not sore loser like the protagonist. The Shen family members stood and frowned in anger at the impudence of the messenger. Some individuals from the crowd murmured the name Yao Tianhua as being the genius alchemist from the Yao's family. Another added that Yao Tianhua, at the age of 16, was already able to refine mid-mortal grade pills. Thus it was no wonder that the Shui family wanted to renounce the marriage, others sighing that the Shui families were someone who doesn't keep their words. The protagonist, unfazed, questioned, if the Shui family wanted to renounce the marriage, why didn't they send someone to say it? The messenger retorted back that it was because of the protagonist, Shen Xiang, and he wasn't able to grasp why the Shui family's beautiful and charming daughter sees in a waste like him that made her determined not to withdraw from the marriage. The protagonist thought and reflected that, just as he had thought there was no way Shen Xiang would propose to withdraw from the marriage. The protagonist loudly proclaimed since Shen Xiang refused to withdraw, he too would refuse. The messenger, unable to make the protagonist withdraw, proposed that he would let the protagonist take his initiative to withdraw from marriage to save his own face so that he doesn't embarrass himself, and then added if the protagonist didn't want to withdraw, he can have a competition with the young master of the Yao's family. And leaving the deciding factor on the result, the messenger also added, whatever small remaining honor the protagonist had will be lost in front of the three families. Some groups from crowd questioned if he wanted Shen Xiang to compete in the alchemy with Yao Tianhua. The protagonist calmly but nonchalantly replied that he accepted the challenge and left it to the Yao family to decide whether the competition would be held in alchemy or the martial arts, leaving both Shen Jinhua and his father gasping with shock. Both the father and son argued whether Shen Xiang was stupid, as Shen Xiang had only just refined mortal-level pill in alchemy, whereas Yao Tianhua experience in alchemy far surpasses him by a gap of more than 10 years, adding that if he lose, not only his honor, but the honor of the entire Shen family would be lost. Shen Xiang, with eyes closed and imagining Shen Xiang standing behind him, with strong resolve, responded that like Shen Xiang never gave up on him, he too shall never give up on her, and that he would win no matter the situation. The messenger, in a mocking and condescending tone, called the protagonist as an ungrateful little brat. Then he proceeded to leave while telling the protagonist that he will be notified on the date for competition. Shen Xiang stood, pulling out the sword, as the messenger was leaving, asked him to halt, and with a swing threw the sword towards the messenger. Though the sword was supposed to miss and land before the messenger, it left a small wound on the messenger's face. The messenger stood with shock. The protagonist, unfazed, told the messenger to take away the Yao family's stuff and not to dirty their Shen family's courtyard. The messenger, after coming to his senses, was enraged, calling the protagonist as a bastard, and that the protagonist didn't know how to behave. With clenched fist jumped towards Shen Xiang. As he attacked Shen Xiang, saying that he would kill him on behalf of his young master, the protagonist managed to block and was pushed back by the impact. The messenger proceeded to continue his attack out of nowhere. He sensed some intense aura besides him. As he glanced towards the side, he was terrified. It was Shen Tianhu, emitting blue lightning aura and clenched fist, jumped and landed between them, making the ground crack on impact. Shen Tianhu then reprimanded that as a Deccan in the Shen family, his arrogant behavior at the Shen family's territory was crossing the limit, and if he thought that the Shen family didn't have anyone that could stop him, continuing in anger warned, even if he or the Shen's family kills him, the Yao's family wouldn't stand up for him. The messenger, upon realization, was terrified, hurriedly left to save his own skin, while saying that everything will be decided on the competition stage. After watching the messenger leave, Shen Tianhu turned to his son, wanting to ask if he was all right. Shen Xiang claimed that he was fine. Shen Tianhu, then turning towards the elders, suggested that they all accept Shen Xiang, and Shen Xiang would help Shen Jinhua recover by refining pills to help him recover, but also no longer pursue the matter regarding privately teaching spirit-level technique. Turning to an elder called Pai, asked for his confirmation. The elder, shocked and with the sweats of guilt, chuckled and agreed, concluding that after all they were all family members. After the incident, the new Patriarch's second selection continued, and Shen Xiang had also started a special cultivation session in the mountains. At the waterfall, Shen Xiang recollected the teachings of Su Meo for symbols of divine art, which contained the 4 chi of the azure dragon, white tiger, vermilion, and black tortoise. Shen Xiang began his practice. A shadow of the tiger appeared above him. While he practiced meticulously, Shen Xiang noted that the tiger chi had begun to take effect, though not as smooth as harnessing the azure dragon chi. While on the other hand, Shen Tianhu also made great strides, defeating one competitor after another and proceeding to rank up. Finally, the last day for selection arrived. Shen Tianhu and Shen Haohai faced each other. At the Shen family's courtyard, the battle for the patriarch position for the Shen's family had finally reached the finals. Shen Tianhu stood opposite to Shen Haohai and Shen Haohai. The obstacle for the way to succeed for the position of the patriarch for Shen Tianhu was for Shen Tianhu to defeat both of them, the two brothers. Then the position of patriarch shall belong to Shen Tianhu. Shen Tianhu, with enthusiastic spirit, asked if they would both fight together against him at the same time or one at a time. Shen Haohai, with gleaming eyes, stepped forward, saying in order to win the conviction of others, he alone would first face him. Shen Tianhu, with glowing eyes like the beast and his aura, emitting dark electrical waves around his body, transformed his chi to Thunder Tiger. Shen Haohai admired Shen Tianhu beast transformation skills. Then he also proceeded to transform into an angry wolf. Both fighters respected each other's strength. The crowd watching the competition was in frenzy, marveling at the beast transformation of the 8th level of mortal martial realm, claiming it as an iconic technique, which uses true chi to change one's own state and even uses the special power contained in birds, beasts, or weapon. Both fighters clashed fists and using their beast power, while complementing each other's strength and technique. The fighting area was engulfed in chi and smokes, a result of fierce attacks. Their exchange of words seemed like a friendly spar. The crowds, on the other hand, were terrified due to the effects. Debris of rock and soil flew from one place to another. The fight lasted for more than an hour. Shen Haohai finally lay on the ground, exhausted and defeated. Shen Tianhu, standing above him, executed the final move with Thunder Tiger Absolute Formation, striking Shen Haohai and leaving him immobilized and bloodied. Shen Tianhu then asked Shen Haohai to submit. Shen Haohai did not resist and gave in to surrender. He also cautioned him that, though he may have won this round, Shen Tianhu himself didn't gain much advantage either. Shen Tianhu gestured in approval, placed his left hand on his injured stomach, violently spurting out blood. Shen Haohai stood beside the injured Shen Tianhu, advised him to surrender, as he had already sustained heavy injuries. Shen Tianhu, kneeling, after vomiting blood, refused to surrender. He knew he had to win the seat of patriarch. Despite his injury, he had his son's hope. Someone from behind walked towards Shen Tianhu, placed his hand on Shen Tianhu's shoulder. Shen Xiang appeared at the right time, and as the substitute for his father, he took his place. Shen Xiang complimented his father on his fight, saying that he looked quite handsome and he watched his fight. As soon as he finished his cultivation, Shen Tianhu answered back, saying that there was no doubt about his handsomeness, it was just the age had made him little old. Shen Tianhu was helped by 2 persons to get off the fighting arena, as his son assured him to leave the rest to him and replaced him. Shen Xiang, on the arena, requested the elders to fight in his father's stead. Shen Haohai reminded Shen Xiang, addressing him as nephew, that the fight for the succession of patriarch position was a life and death fight, asking him if he had really thought about fighting in his father's place. The protagonist affirmed positively. Shen Haohai, undermining the protagonist's strength and to show off his good-natured side, asked the protagonist that he would allow him to make a first free move, also advising the protagonist to put in all his strength. The protagonist, unwavering, answered back that he would not hold back. with a fierce leap, lunged forward to attack. The protagonist, after a week of cultivation, had entered a 5th level of mortal martial realm. He was curious regarding its effects against the 7th level of mortal martial realm, who also was his opponent, Uncle. Shen Xiang, retracting, felt the protagonist's chi was weird, as the protagonist approached him like a raging storm. The protagonist launched a storm-killing fist which was blocked by Shen Xiang. The impact sent waves. The scene made the elder wondered if it was the same Shen Xiang from before. One onlooker claimed that the attack has the power of 6th level of mortal martial realm. Huge smoke and dust rose. The protagonist wondered whether his attack had worked. As the smoke cleared, a shield, a size of human body, made of ice was seen, and behind it, Shen Xiang spoke up, complimenting the protagonist for his ability to use chi attack, despite being in the 5th level of mortal martial realm, confessing that he had underestimated him. The protagonist examined that there was no visible effect. He had concentrated his full power of Azure Dragon True Chi on his strike. Shen Xiang then transformed into a beast with wings of ice on his back. His legs morphed into bird's legs, fingernails long, icy and sharp. Also a spike grew on both his arms. Shen Xiang admitted this was his first time fighting in his beast transformation form. Shen Xiang was surprised, as the beast transformation was the ability that was only available at the 8th level of mortal martial realms. Shen Xiang proudly clarified that he had already completed the 7th level of mortal martial realm and was only waiting for a breakthrough, while mastering some initial of the beast transformation skills. Shen Xiang loudly proclaiming that the protagonist will definitely lose this competition, and, through a barrage of ice attack at the protagonist, Shen Xiang jumped high in the air, avoiding the barrage of ice attacks, and sneaked near Shen Xiang and with the Azure Dragon Fist attacked. Shen Xiang noticed that there was still no effects. Shen Xiang then ran away from Shen Xiang to gain some distance. Shen Xiang flew in the air, appearing before Shen Xiang, and kicked him, crashing him against some crowd spectating the fight. As Shen Xiang lay on top the bodies of the crowd, Shen Xiang said if Shen Xiang had at least 10 more years he might have faced defeat, but it was just today that he had to win for the patriarchal position. With 100 Fisher Glacier Stomp attacked Shen Xiang, the protagonist knew that his Azure Dragon True Chi was not able to hurt him even a single bit, and also making the situation worse, his chi was running out. Shen Xiang, claiming that he would crash the protagonist like an egg against the rock, proceeded to attack him with his hand, directing his chi against Shen Xiang. The impact of the attack produced a large smoke, making Shen Xiang's body invisible. Shen Xiang, inside the cloud of smoke, laughed maniacally, surprising Shen Xiang, who admitted that the protagonist's progress was indeed beyond everyone's expectation, but he doesn't have to be reckless if he met someone he couldn't beat. The protagonist followed up saying that he had thought he could not beat him too, but now he had found a way, and even if there was a slim chance, he would try. As Shen Xiang stood hovering in air, admonishing the efforts of judging from the impact of earlier attacks of the protagonist, not being able to cause any damage, confidently felt that the protagonist could not cause much harm. Menacingly asked if the protagonist thought that he could win. The protagonist, reflecting from earlier attacks having no impact, agreed that the damage was not effective. The aura of a dragon hovered above Shen Xiang, along with an aura of a tiger at his right side. Shen Xiang said that he found a way to crack his shield. Shen Xiang was taken aback, thinking the protagonist's technique was really weird. The protagonist thought that in the next move he would combine the White Tiger True Chi with Azure Dragon True Chi, accessing that with his level of mastery of the White Tiger Divine Art, it would not be enough, and with the Azure Dragon True Chi already tested and proving to be futile. But the combination of these True Chi might have a special power. Shen Xiang, unable to withstand the protagonist's resilience attitude, flew towards him, declaring that the next attack would make him unable to stand again. Annoyingly asked if the protagonist thought he still had time to think, and attacked by throwing ice shrapnels, a condensed ice needle attack. The protagonist, with quick reflex, avoided the damage while running. Sumeo complimented the protagonist for his quick thinking, for discovering the spiritual technique by himself, adding that the protagonist uses different types of different true chi, and because of it created a turbulent flow of his true chi, disrupting the flow of opponent's true chi. The protagonist, confused, asked about the true chi turbulence. Sumeo, being the ever-enthusiastic teacher, explained when only one true chi is used against the ice shield will be affected by the true chi in one direction, but when he uses another kind of true chi, they fuse together to form a turbulent flow. The direction of the effect of true chi on the ice shield will increase, and under the effect of different true chi flows, it becomes easier to destroy the ice shield. The protagonist then concluded as long as more types of true chi are used at the same time, the effects will be stronger. As he approached Shen Xiang, who was also approaching him with ice needles on front ready for attack. Shen Xiang loudly claimed that he understood and positioned, ready to deliver an attack, with chi gathered at his fist, looking with determination at oncoming Shen Xiang. Shen Xiang, while directing his attack towards the protagonist, thought that the protagonist was really giving him a bad feeling, therefore, he needed to defeat him as soon as possible. Meanwhile, Shen Xiang readied himself to attack, gathering and fusing all the true chi, the 4 elephant divine arts, into the punch. As he waited for the chance to attack, the pressure of the ice attacks was also becoming heavier, and his meridians surging wildly and his power seeming to be sucked away. Just standing also seems to be getting difficult. Shen Xiang, sensing the protagonist's struggle, summoned a large ice above him, and with condensed ice needle, attacked him, determined to finish Shen Xiang with this last move. The protagonist, withstanding the force, knew he needed to win. As the ice neared the protagonist, it was turned into ice shield. With 4 elephant fists he struck, the ice shield was shattered like glasses, shocking Shen Xiang. The impact made Shen Xiang spurt out blood and fell to the ground, lifeless. Shocking especially Shen Jinhua and his father Shen Xiang, along with spectators. An elder loudly proclaimed Shen Xiang as the winner. The crowd cheered on his name, chanting that there was now a hope for their Shen family, and his father gestured a thumbs up to his son. Shen Xiang also gestured back, but exhaustion overtook, making him fall down stiff like a statue. Sometime after the match, Shen Xiang is seen bandaged and laid on his bed. Sumeo sat beside the sleeping and unconscious protagonist, contemplating whether to address him as brave or just foolish, and Bai Yuyu stood beside them, puffing in annoyance. Sumeo, applying the medicine, suggested to let his true chi run through his meridians and explained that to perform such feats of pouring out all his chi, he would have been crippled even if he didn't die. If it were a normal person, Shen Xiang smiled like a kid who fought a candy snatcher and saved his candy, asked if he can still be considered as an ordinary, adding that he was still alive and well, also in a good shape, leaving Sumeo astounded and Bai Yuyu unable to control. Her anger shouted what the protagonist was thinking, if he were to be killed. Shen Xiang meekly answered that he was glad that Bai Yuyu cared about him, leaving Bai Yuyu flustered and Sumeo bickering at Bai Yuyu. Bai Yuyu reminded that it was only for the blood contract. Suddenly, Shen Xiang remembered something and ran to retrieve something, and leaving them wondering. As he retrieved something, Shen Xiang remembered what Sumeo had said regarding hell spirit grass healing properties and to cut it in half and soak in the medicinal wine. With a grin, looking towards the 2 girls, Shen Xiang suggested that it was time to drink it. As they drank the wine, Sumeo praised the hell spirit grass as a treasure of heaven and earth. A single cup had the ability to restore their flesh to 10% of its strength before the injury. Shen Xiang, after hearing her words, said that he should soak the remaining half too, if that was the case. Bai Yuyu nonchalantly replied that he should preserve it and not waste it, adding that the Hell Spirit Grass is a treasure in the mortal martial world, but has little effect on the people of their realm. Su Meo affirmed and said that he needed to work hard and reach true martial realm so that he could help them. Shen Xiang then wondered and said that the once unattainable true martial realm seems to be getting closer and closer, leaving both Su Meo in shock and Bai Yuyu in annoyance. Bai Yuyu, in a drunken state, reiterated if mortal martial world thought that the true martial realm cultivator was powerful, while Su Meo, almost biting her fingers suddenly, seems to remember something. Bai Yuyu then proceeded to explain and threw the protagonist against the ground, saying there was Nirvana realm, immortal martial realm, and so on, making the individual strong enough to even ascend to immortal martial world, calling the protagonist as unambitious boy. Puzzled Shen Xiang lay on the floor as Bai Yuyu, foot stomped, near his head, confused and flustered. He asked her not to be angry. Su Meo said that Bai Yuyu was drunk, saying that Bai Yuyu never touched alcohol and would get drunk with just a drop, leaving the protagonist shocked. As Bai Yuyu sat on top of the protagonist, Su Meo continued saying that the cultivators could disperse alcohol with their true qi, and said that the last time Bai Yuyu was drunk was more than 100 of years ago. Suddenly, Bai Yuyu jumped up and kicked the bed and making it split in half, with intense aura, leaving both the protagonist and Su Meo fearful and shocked. Bai Yuyu turned towards the protagonist with flustered face, twisted the protagonist's arms back, saying that it was now her turn to train the protagonist, and that he should hurry to improve himself, as the protagonist cried and shouted for help in agony and torment.